Back in April, when I was here, I was talking about finding joy during anxious times. And I began with the claim that we are living in a historical moment. And I said that we are being called to transform our faith into a more courageous and creative movement. Like spiritual leaders throughout time who found themselves in pivotal historical moments. Each time the Spirit would move the woke to ask, what is being asked of us now as people of faith? And much of what I talked about in that sermon was based on Martha Beck's book, Beyond Anxiety, as she writes that our anxiety keeps us locked in our logical, analytical, verbal left brains, and that shuts down our imaginative, creative thinking. In pivotal times, such as we find ourselves in now, I think, creativity, imaginative thinking, is exactly what's called for. And so let's think with our right brains today, even though we are listening to words. As I read her book, I was encouraged to stop poring over the news quite so much, to stop looking for statistical analysis, to stop looking for points of clarification that I could use to strengthen my arguments with. I even stopped reading a copy of Project 2025 that I had been keeping on my coffee table. Yuck. Instead, I committed to going off leash at least a little bit every day, taking some time to spark joy, because I realized that that has always been the wellspring of my activism. Good trouble, the kind of activism that John Lewis advocated throughout his life, requires right-brained thinking, creativity, compassion, clarity, courage, confidence, calmness, curiosity, connectedness. These are all right brain activities that allow us to come out to play with our imagination. The Reverend Meg Riley once wrote that our imagination is, in fact, a moral imperative. For how else are we going to get ourselves out of the quagmires of human strife? Now, whether or not we see imagination as a moral imperative, our imagination is certainly one of the things that makes us most fully human, and we are called to be our most fully human selves, and that, I think, is a moral imperative. I've always believed that one of the most important ways of being an activist and a moral agent is to tell a good story about how we see injustices affecting ourselves or people that we care about, whether we tell that story to a neighbor or a family member or someone standing in line to vote or in an editorial page or a letter to a congressperson. Telling stories is, you probably won't be surprised to hear this, one of my favorite ways of being creative. Imagination through the use of words. I love to tell stories. I love to embellish stories. I love to listen to stories and read them. And I love to take them apart when I hear them to imagine what is the story beneath the story. And this is true even when the storytellers are not of my political persuasion. I think we sometimes do ourselves a disservice when we listen to a story and we're fact-checking it with our left brain instead of listening deeply to what the story is beneath the story. What are they really trying to tell us? And why is this story resonating with so many other people? When I was in seminary, I learned there are 3 ways to tell and to interpret a story. There's the literal fundamentalist telling, which is totally left brain. There's a second method, which is called the critical historical method, which is also left brain, but it adds a historical context to it. So for instance, you might say, yeah, there is a story in our scripture about Jesus walking on water, but historically it was true that that lake had a lot of sandbars in it. And then finally, there's the religious, existential, spiritual interpretation. And this is where our imagination begins to kick in as we're listening, where the essence of the story allows the listener to hear themselves in the story. And this is the interpretation that's most often the most powerful. Take the story of Noah, for instance. Now, let's set aside whether there was actually an ark, whether the dimensions of that ark were actually big enough for the case at hand, for the task at hand. When I told this story to a group of children one Sunday morning years ago, I heard one little girl, I think she was probably in 1st or 2nd grade, kind of gasp as I told the story, and she said, "But what about the babies? Why are there no baby animals? Why did only the mama and daddy animals get on the ark?" And I thought, okay, how are we going to handle this now? And I said, you know what? That's a very important oversight. Let's see if we can fix that. And so we retold the story with the babies getting on the ark, and we actually had a model ark in the classroom, and the kids made a crib on the top of the ark to hold all the baby animals. Because it wouldn't have served any of us for those children to be distracted by the power of the story's images by worrying about the babies. The image I wanted to leave the children with that morning was of this tiny boat built to specifications that God gave to Noah that probably did not seem adequate to the task that was given. A tiny boat in this huge sea, and Noah, a good man through no fault of his own, is left for 5 months with no horizon in sight, no contact with the outside world, nothing that he could do except float along, no one to turn to, sending a dove out day after day after day, having that dove return back to the boat because there was Still no land in sight. Is this an image that we can all relate to? I think we have all been in this place at one time or another in our lives. Maybe some of you are feeling that way this morning. And even if those children could not relate to that story that morning, I wanted to leave them with a container for future experience, so that if they ever found themselves in a situation feeling that there was no land in sight, they could remember what a faithful response feels like, to float and hope, and to keep sending out that dove until it returns with the olive branch. Storytelling is an art form, whether you are a professional storyteller or a Sunday school teacher or a politician. It's almost always used to emphasize the existential and even spiritual dimensions of a story. It's rarely told to pass on historical or factual information. A good story is one that allows your imagination to soar. And whenever we hear a good story, we might ask ourselves, what is the story beneath the story? When I took a storytelling class many years ago, I learned that when you first think of a story, it has no words. It has color and texture and emotions and images, but it has no words. And so we were taught that when we first start putting together a story, we need to draw it. Because if we start writing down words, it automatically takes us out of our imaginative right brains into our left. Throughout time, there have been theologians and religious leaders who have encouraged us to use our imaginations, our right brains, to think about ultimate realities. And I love Alfred North Whitehead, particularly, who gave us what we call process theology, who imagined God as a creative force that we are invited to co-create with on a daily basis. A creative force that encourages us to be loving and whole people, encouraging us to serve the world by imagining and then creating lives that are joyful, rich with meaning, adventuresome, diverse in experience, giving us a zest for life, beauty, and peace in our relationships. Whitehead said, this is what a life of faith looks like. To be co-creating every day with the holy. And I want you to imagine, just for a moment, how your life might have unfolded differently if this had been the message, the story that you got when you were growing up, that this would be what it meant to lead a moral life. Not staying on the straight and narrow, but learning to appreciate the complexity and novelty of life, forming relationships that bridge our diversities. How might your story have been shaped differently? This is one of the reasons I love our new Unitarian Universalist principles, the one that's shaped like a flower with love in the middle, that's on the back of your order of service. All the ways that love becomes manifested in the world are the petals on the flower: transformation, justice, interdependence, pluralism, equity, generosity. This is a very Whiteheadian view of what it means to live a life of faith and a moral life. There's nothing straight and narrow about this vision. And it makes me so happy that this is what we are teaching our children now about what it means to live a moral life. You know, each morning we are given a magic paintbrush to wield. We are given the opportunity to use our imagination, to see what the world needs, to see what we need, to begin the mending that is always necessary. Tycoon, the mending of the world. We grab at a sentence or a brushstroke or chords of music to bind the wounds around us and within us with a special kind of tenderness. My prayer for each of us this morning is that we take this work seriously, but with light hearts, imagining each morning, perhaps, how to send love out into the world. Look at that flower and its petals. Which of those might you choose to focus on today? Maybe it's cooking a wonderful meal for loved ones or for yourself. Maybe it's mentoring a child. Maybe it's going to a rally. Maybe it's sending a thoughtful letter to someone who needs your support, or sending a rather pissy letter to someone who doesn't deserve your support in Congress. Take seriously the moral imperative to be fully alive, for your soul's longing for connection, and for your unique ability to be a manifestation of love. No matter what is happening in the world, do not ever let anyone take that from you. May it be so, and blessed be.